Pleasure to be here, and I try to entertain you with a very dry academic research, so you have a chance to fall asleep with a good excuse. No? So while he was talking about this academic thing, I fell asleep. It wasn't my fault. So I'm going to show you or share with you research we have been doing towards establishing a way to capture the discourse of service design in a regular way. So once in a while, we would capture what we are talking about and how we are talking about service design to see how it's changing. So the real presentation is about the development of this process of how to capture this discourse or discursive elements on service design. But since I was told that the delivering is the most important, I will focus on the result of the first time we capture this, right? So that's what I was telling, the construction of approach and not exactly the result. So in fall 2016, we were at the Savannah College of Art and Design. We were approached by some companies in the US asking us what service design could do for them in terms of organizational change. We interviewed some organizational manager, tried to create a briefing, okay? Those organizational change managers. Based on the briefing, we sent this briefing to several service design across the world, collected their response, and try to affinitize, and we had 4 students for 2 weeks trying to make sense of how they would approach this. And wasn't a surprise that we discovered that each one of them approached in a different way, with a different process, involving different people, with different timings. And this is kind of the beauty of how, it's kind of beauty of service design, right? You have space to do your stuff. But again, is there any common trait about this? So after affinitizing for 2 weeks, we saw like a very kind of a pattern. All of them were talking about understand context. We heard several times here, context, the context, the context. So we kind of start with the context. The context almost gives us a space and a direction for research. We research this context. The context will give us a sequence of events, of deliverables, and the sequence will, in its turn, deliver deliverables, and then these deliverables will change the context, and it's an endless thing. So this was the kind of the logic we saw behind how these service design, although following completely different path, would be their kind of the way they proceeded to approach the organizational change briefing, right? As a result, the students involved published on Touchpoint the results of this first step. So, but our goal was to collect those narratives from these service designers, right? And then starts phase 2. We understood that the way we were reading and affinitizing those narratives was telling much more about us than about service design themselves, right? So we say, let's try to make this analysis a little bit less biased. Let's see if we find a way to do this, and we actually end up using a software. You can have like tons of software like this that they do quantitative, qualitative data analysis. And basically, when the software checked the frequency, the sequence, and proximity of words, the software found three main topics that were dealt with. Okay? So those are words, kind of patterns that all these service designers used, kind in the same sequence around them. And so just to give you a sense, it's like the most used word was stories, followed or preceded by service, then projects, maps. I guess you can get the thing, right? It's a very mathematical analysis of the text that they write, right? And you have a value of consistency. How consistent those words occur in the same sequence, proximity, throughout these narratives, right? And we see that stories, service, projects, prototyping, innovation, journey, mapping, design, working methods has a consistency of 8.4. It's not an absolute value. It can only be read in comparison to other consistence, the consistency of other topics. Nothing new, of course. This is the stories, prototyping. We all say, not that we say the same thing, but we describe almost the same way, using the same words. Okay, that's kind of where our heart is. The other thing, so this is, sorry, come back. So those three topics, stories, team data, and implementation, okay? Would be kind of the one we know, and the other two were research. When you read through and when these words occur, the service designer were talking about research. And when, of course, the third topic occurs, they were talking about implementation. So this is where we are. We know this is true. And based on these three topics, we can see in the background what we know, right? We talk about the now, we talk about tomorrow, and talk about how to get there, right? So, okay, there's nothing new. We're recognizing this pattern through their narratives. What starts to get interesting is when you compare the consistency of these topics, okay? So where our heart is, so the logic, the more words we use, the higher the eigenvalue, the more this topic is a shared language among service designers, okay? The less words, the lower the value. It's not that they don't talk about this, but they talk about in different ways, okay? And you might say, yeah, no, implementation changes, it depends on, so they would never be able to talk about the same, using the same words. But you can say this also about the topic one, Yeah, it's always contextual. But, we were talking yesterday, right, Robert Ball, and you can say, oh, but this doesn't, we don't have implementation like architects don't have implementation. They don't need to build a house. Okay, so we could have an implementation common discourse like this, but we don't, right? It's ongoing thing. And it makes sense from a very statistical way to have a conference about delivering, knowing that the less consistent discourse that we have is about implementation. And events like this help create a common discourse about implementation, which is exactly what the numbers say that is lacking. So congratulations for the the team that chose the title. It's really interesting. This is kind of examples. How we got this, so how this was done, we ended up publishing a paper at ServDes. And then we say, okay, let's provide words for the words that are lacking. And we started a phase 3, a proto-discourse, like I love the slow hunch, right, process. Like, let's put words where it's lacking to see if something sticks. So based on these words, we went back to the narrative that the service design created and tried to check the literature and see what's missing, what could we bring to fulfill or to fill these topics with words. And those are only simple examples of how we did this. So went back to the text, saw where they were using management, tried to weave this into literature, bring back and create a meaningful discourse around these words or adding these words. This phase was published on the Service SIG in Paris this year, sorry. And then we went to make it more marketable and trying to describe those topics in words that would nudge towards what's lacking, at least given the literature review that we did. So the topic team data was named Understanding Stakeholders' Context, which we call research. But when you review the literature, review what they were saying, it's not, research is a tool to understand stakeholders' context. The topic, stories and services, that we thrive and we love to do workshops and creativity, blah, blah, blah. It's not about creativity, it's about understanding innovation dynamics. It's still too raw, of course. Those names and topics should evolve and have more natural language associated to, but it's a kind of a pointing towards what needs to be done. And then the third one, which is implementing, co-creating, again, it's not implementation, it's transition, it's institutional transitions. We're trying to change companies, change products, change things, so, and since there's never an end, so it's to understand institutional transition. How this, of course, very dry names, but it's kind of a, to give the sense of what are we talking about, right? And to test this, we invited some practitioners and professors to review Then we submitted to the result, we submitted to Touchpoint again. I have to say it was kind of a strange, because it was part of the research, the submission, so it's kind of an inception thing. If they accept, it makes sense or not. So, and this resulted in the 3 overarching perspectives for service design. Then we reviewed, and it was a really bad mistake. It's not the 3 overarching perspectives of service design. We are offering 3 perspectives for service design. It's not that we capture, and this is the DNA of service design. So it's a work in progress, right? We're reviewing and checking if all words are in the right place at the right time. So the title should be 3 overarching perspectives for, like an offering for the community to see if they like or they want to adopt it. It's not, it's not an X-ray or the DNA. And phase 5, we're doing almost the same thing with service design job descriptions. So we just collected 20 from October. This was in last month, September. So we collected job descriptions of that had the title service design in the United States, and we proceed the same analysis. And in terms of abstraction for documents, what comes first is planning innovation. So when a company describe a job position that they pretend to or intend to hire a service designer, the first and foremost topic that we can extract from is planning innovation. Very, very interesting perspective when you check the words, when these words occur, in which context. It's interesting. It's not to control innovation, but to be able to plan accordingly, or playing towards fostering innovation. It's a very mature perspective. This is just how these words work together. Planning innovation, so you see engineering, communication skills, strong passion. So it's really, really interesting. And then by paragraph, what comes is human-centered experiences. So they want candidates that have proven track record or experience on humanly centered processes. So if they are experienced with in-depth interview, workshops, like the very human relationship management, which is also very interesting. And it falls from 22, the consistency, to 9, which is still good. This is how the words occur together. And then the third one, by phrase, which is the more minute detail of this document, is design research, okay? So then we go back to the research that we talk so much. So those are the 3 main things and how these words occur into the job description, right? So how we sell ourselves and how we present our work, one side, how employers want to talk to us, and how they describe, or when they want to hire us as an employee, how they describe us, right? And so this is the connection that we are trying to understand, how this ties back to the tree. How can we bridge the two, right? How we describe ourselves, how they describe us, and how can we bridge these two things. And so going back, those are the kind of the token where all this research kind of ties back to. And so we're developing some materials, bringing back all the literature that supports this. And Kemper, the other day, published multi-level consideration, very interesting paper, and we could see exactly how these three perspectives were, like, has a background for their research that was completely made independently, right? But it was interesting to see their connection. And we are exploring those three perspectives into phases, prototyping, experiment, test, pilots. There's a very interesting research that we use the word prototyping for everything. And by analyzing how we describe those different prototypes, we could name them differently. It could be prototyping, understand the stakeholders' context, and then experiment. It's all language-based, the research, right? And although here we're kind of proposing a linear, my students know that I always say, like, if you want to get corporations to understand you, start with 1, 2, 3, 4, and they will follow you. If you don't use the 1, 2, 3, 4, they will lose you. But the way to see these are 3 buckets in a project that we need to talk to our client to understand state A, understand the stakeholders' context, do whatever you want, the way you want, but have a discussion with your partner about this, and then where we want to go, and how we get there, and one influencing the other, so it's kind of, you have to fill 3 buckets, not linearly. And based on our, the result of the research from phase 1 and phase 2, we need to fill those buckets ourselves with more words, more description. So when you check this from a discourse perspective, we passed the worst part of the road, right? Of course, it's a social system. It comes and goes. We have, at some point, you have a common discourse, and it starts to variate again. Based on the result of the research, we're close to have this common discourse that will last for a while, right? It's never static. And what is interesting, if we could have a common discourse and not a strict set of tools and sequence, we could still maintain the freedom and the beauty of service design that enables the most varied ways of contextual action, right? So, yeah, that's it. This is kind of the token of the whole research. We see service as a system, and based on this systemic view, have discussions and conversations with your clients about the state A, establishing state B, of course, and how to get there. So those would be the 3 types of dialogues or conversation that we should invest in developing with our clients. Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here. Nice to see friendly faces around. Any questions? We have 5 minutes, right? No questions?
If you look at the classical double diamond model, as service designers, we tend to define the last half of the second diamond as implementation. Wouldn't you actually say that from your research, there's a whole different world out there that's much longer and more complex than that fourth half?
Yeah, going back to what we discussed yesterday with Robert Ball, it's more of lack of we having a common explanation about whatever. That's the goal. It will be, if we don't want to get to deliver, okay, let's accordingly do this. We're kind of, as Ball suggests, the architects. We're architects. We create houses, but we don't need to build a house. It needs to be solid. It cannot be whatever. That's the result. We need, what the numbers say, it's just a matter of we need to have a common discourse about this. Not a common practice or common, or 1, 2, 3, or static way of approaching, but we should, even if the discourse at the end will be this, like, well, we all know, whenever you talk to a client, we all say the same thing. We say, hey, we do this. And it will be contextual, okay? If we have a consistent discourse, well, it will be kind of other professions around, right?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.